And hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast, a good old podcast about video games. Today I am joined by Tom of 13AM Games to talk about one of their titles that has been recently brought to the Switch, Runbow.
Yep. How's it going?
Good, so I'll start with the standard who you are and what you do.
Yeah. My name's Tom McCall. I work at 13AM Games as the lead designer, which basically means I cover anything from level design to systems design, mechanic design, and a bit of biz dev stuff when it's needed. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
So, how did you come to work for 13AM Games? Were you there from like the company's inception, or were you brought on board somewhere after it was made?
Actually, I was one of the 9 founders of the company. Uh, we all kind of met and decided to pursue this business as 9 of us from George Brown's game design class, where we all met.
Oh,
Hmm.
so yes, even Runbow has been out for a while, but just in case there's any of the -7 people who listen to this show don't know about it, what exactly is Runbow? Like, how would you pitch it if someone was walking by your booth at PAX?
Yeah, so Runbow is a party action platforming game where players race against each other in a 2D side scroller to try and reach a trophy first. There is a really interesting color mechanic where there are certain objects in the game that match the background colors, and the background colors change constantly. So as you're running through the level, trying to beat each other up and race to the trophy at the end, um, platforms will disappear, reappear in front of you. Walls will disappear and reappear. Other hazards will do the same. So it's a very kind of like crab bucket kind of party action game.
Hmm. So the color changing affecting the platform's mechanic was like when the game was still like in the theoretical stages. Was that always an idea you had going into it, or was that added on like as you began actually making it?
So the game actually was in like became a thing during the 2014 Global Game Jam, where, as I mentioned before, a group of us were in class together, and we split up into 2 teams. One team made a mobile game, and the other made Rumbo. So from the very beginning, that color mechanic was one of the kind of 2 staples of the game. The other being this kind of competitive running, racing, 2D side-scrolling mechanic. So it was there from the beginning, but it wasn't always as you see it now. Originally, every character was going to be a different color, and the background would match those player colors. And if the background color was the same as a player, they would kind of get like a mini power up for X amount of time. The problem was that we wanted the game to have like 8 or more players locally. We ended up with 9 on the Wii U, and so what happened was there was 8 colors in the game at any one point in time, which meant you had like a 12.5% chance of it actually being your color, which felt kind of not that great. So we ended up, I think, reducing most palettes or levels down to, I think, 3 core colors so that there was actually a greater chance for these interactions to happen. Um, but it's always the color mechanic has been one of the staple mechanics from the start.
Okay, and like if someone were to ask you like what distinguishes this from like other platformer party games,
Mm.
like and like mechanically, how would you like give them? How would you explain it to them?
I would say the sheer amount of players locally that we were able to achieve. I think we were the only Wii U game to actually have 9 players locally
Hmm.
through like nunchuck shenanigans and the use of the gamepad. So that was a big one, which you could get a ton of people around a screen at one time, which is a really interesting thing. The idea of like a platform racer, I mean, it's been done in other games, but this color mechanic in a mixture and the kind of art style and setting to make it all very simple and easy to grab onto is something I would say that separated us from a lot of other games. You can just pick Runbow up and play and kind of get it within seconds. It's not terribly complicated. The mechanic really explains itself because visually the things that are disappearing are actually disappearing. So I think those really helped. Besides that, I think on the Wii U at least, like the original platform it launched on, we had a game mode called Color Master, which got a lot of traction as well, where one player on the gamepad would be playing against people running on the TV. So they would be running they'd just be trying to complete a race, and the person on the gamepad would be dropping bombs on them, would be hitting them with lightning, flipping their screen around, slowing everything down, etc. Mm-hmm. So that was a really interesting feature that really made use of the Wii U gamepad, which we haven't been able to kind of reproduce with later platforms, unfortunately. But I think that mixture of things was really interesting. And I think the art style as well. It was very colorful, impactful. I haven't really seen anything that quite looks like it before, so I thought that was really cool.
So, I know Runbow is available on all sorts of platforms, but especially recently with this Switch release and in the previous generation, having it launch on the Wii U and later bringing it to the 3DS, it seems like one of the focuses seemed to be bringing it to the Nintendo platforms. So were all of you just Nintendo fans and decided that if we can do this, we should do this, or was it also like, your inner business sense, like this'll do well if we bring it to Nintendo?
It's kind of a mixture of things, really. So after the game jam where we made the game and showed it off, we ended up taking it to a couple other student showcases, and we ended up winning. There's a showcase down here in Toronto called Level Up, and we ended up winning like best design. And it was kind of that moment where we're like, oh, we have actually something really interesting here. And, being naive students, we're like, we should show this around to people and see if anyone is interested. Before the game was like arguably in a great state for that. So we actually ended up kind of cold calling Nintendo, because one of my classmates, or one of the guys I work with now, had a Wii U development kit, because for his thesis project he was really gung-ho about using the gamepad. So we had this kit on hand, we had the ability to put it on the kit, and we got a contact through Nintendo, and we just kind of sent it to them. I think we were lucky enough at the time that Nintendo was looking to increase their third-party engagement, especially with like an indie scene. They were doing this, like the Nindy thing started that year. Mm-hmm. I believe it started that year. So we were able to kind of get onto that program. They took us around other shows. We met a bunch of other developers, which led to like all the guest characters and whatnot, and kind of started this train that has been going for the last 4 years or so. So Nintendo is the people that kind of believed in us early on, and we have a pretty good relationship with them. So it all just kind of made sense and worked out.
Okay. I mean, for myself personally, I first discovered Runbow. Are you familiar with a show on YouTube called Video Games Awesome?
I'm not familiar with it, but
I'm very deep into that community, and one of the things they do, just because, is to show trailers of upcoming games. And back in the day when the Wii U version of Runbow was getting ready for launch, they showed that little video of you at the Runbow presentation, Runbow's Nintendo presentation, where all of you were racing to the trophy, and that gif of Reggie breaking it down like nobody's business.
Yeah, it was a good time.
How did that happen, if I may ask? That specific filming and making of that video.
Yeah, so that was, I think, part of the Nindies initiative as well. We were one of the titles involved in that program, and we would basically sign up for anything that Nintendo was kind of offering. And one of them was this kind of lunch and learn, where we would send several members of the development team to go and talk to the people that work at Nintendo of America during their lunch break, kind of explain the game, explain what it's all about, and, kind of get the two groups to kind of understand each other a little better. And I think the idea came up from somebody on Nintendo to be like, why you guys are here, why don't we like do a little bit of a film or like something to promote the game, just like show that how involved Nintendo is and etc. And somehow they convinced Reggie to be there. I mean, which was pretty great. He is a giant of a man. He's really awesome. It was really cool to meet him. It was really cool filming that, and it was kind of like it was a bit of like a whirlpool of things. Like, it's not something I ever expected to be happening to me at that time, but it was really cool. But it was mostly through Nintendo's kind of Nindies initiative that stuff was able to come about.
Yeah. So, in addition to the various multiplayer modes, another part that was advertised was like the single player portions. Now, were the single player portions, was that originally part of the original? Was that part of Runbow from the get-go, or was like as you were working on it, you realized that not a lot of party games have a single player addition to them?
Yeah, it was more of the latter. So as we were developing it, we realized, like, looking around at other games in the competition, we're kind of thinking to ourselves, like, if we want this game to have mass appeal, if we want it to, be a little more of a viable, so to speak, it needed a single player component, because the odds of the odds of it being successful as a local multiplayer only title with the kind of USP being 9 players locally, that kind of niche market is pretty small. So we looked at ways of kind of increasing its reach, and one of them was like, well, we have this really cool mechanic, we have the simplicity here. Why don't we just churn out a bunch of single player like challenges from refurbished multiplayer levels? And so we did that. I think in total we made 145 single player levels on like a 12 by 12 grid, with the last level popping up after.
Yep,
and
I can confirm.
And so it was definitely something that came about later, but definitely became a focus for the game as well, because we realized that if we really wanted people to engage with this, that people playing by themselves needed something to do, because running through races by yourself wasn't that great, and coding an AI that could react to the color mechanic was not an experience that our programmers really wanted to go into at the time. So yeah, that's how the single player campaign mode came around. And then the other single player mode, the Behemoth, came around when we wanted to make harder single player stuff with the color mechanic, where we identified there were a bunch of really interesting things that we could do that might be a little too difficult for like what the game was looking. Because when you look at the game from the outside in, it's very much like an E for everything. It's very colorful. It's very friendly. And so some of these more challenging bits needed their own little home where we could make something that challenged people in a way that they may not expect in a game like that. So between those two kind of modes, that's at least that's how they came to be.
Okay. And while I was playing through the single player portion myself and alternating between, smiling and raising my blood pressure to higher levels than it ever should be, like, I noticed that even though there are a lot of levels, like, the individual levels themselves can be, completed most of the time in under a minute, so, what made you decide to make the single-player levels, short but sweet rather than, longer affairs?
I think one of the things that we wanted to do was variety. The mechanic itself has a lot of applications in a bunch of different scenarios, and the kind of pick up and play mentality was something that we wanted to keep even in the single player. So keeping levels short so that players felt like they could pick and choose which ones they wanted to do, and there was no serious time investment. Having a very quick respawn after you die to get you right back in and going were kind of like what made us tailor it towards those lengths. It's also easier, like technically, because you don't have to optimize larger levels and whatnot. So it just kind of made sense, and it allowed us to make a variety of things and really dig deep on some of the stuff.
Okay. And another thing I noticed back in the Wii U trailer days is that there's quite a bit of crossover unlockables from like Shovel Knight, Guacamelee, Commander Video, Shantae, Freedom Planet. So, like, I don't know anything about video games or working with other like indie studios and collaborating with their games. So, how did having those like character skins happen?
So I think the first kind of the idea began when we went to I'm going to forget the name. We went to one of the first showcases that Nintendo took us to. I'm forgetting the name. I'm blanking on it. But we were in a booth beside the guys from Shovel Knight Yacht Club, and I think there were remarks about how our characters kind of look similar because back before we revamped our characters' faces, Hugh, the lead protagonist man guy, had like a T face, kind of like Shovel Knight does. And so there were remarks about how similar it was. And then kind of we thought about it and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like we get Shovel Knight in the game as like a guest character or like a costume or an unlockable. And so we kind of like pitched them the idea. They were actually into it, which was cool. We weren't expecting that. And so it started there. And then we said, well, if we can get them, you know, and through the help of Nintendo, maybe we could get some more. So we kind of approached developers that we knew, like the Guacamelee guys, for example, they're down the street basically here in Toronto. And we've worked with them, or like not worked with them, but we've come to some of the same events and we knew some of them from before that. And some of the other guys we had met at other events or would meet at other events as we continue this. And we approached them, some through Nintendo directly, some by ourselves, and eventually kind of assembled this cast of willing people and just tried to get them all in the game, as many as we could. So it was a mixed effort between us just going and meeting people at events, Nintendo doing a bunch of introductions through the Nindy program, and some people approaching us after they had found out that this was something that was kind of going on. So it was cool. It was like a whole bunch of different. Each case was a different case by case, so to speak.
Okay. And next is like I remember like in the trailers and on your Bandcamp that Runbow's soundtrack can like only be described as like intense. Like whatever you're doing, it feels like you have a lot of energy to do it. So, how did like the particular style of like fast music come about? Like, at what stage did you realize like, oh, we should have this type of music throughout the game?
So back at the original kind of like that global game jam where the game was first created, there was a guy by the name of Dan Rodriguez, who is a composer, walked around. He goes to game jams and he kind of helps people out because audio and music is something that not a lot of people come to game jams to do. And so it was, I think I remember him saying it was a good way for him to meet a bunch of people and like offer his unique services, or like rare services, so to speak. And so we got him to make us a track for Runbow back when we were like first making it, and he made a very upbeat and fast rhythm game that kind of matched the pace of the backgrounds changing and like the franticness of having 8 people on the screen punching each other. And so when we carried on with the game and continued development, we reached out to Dan and said, would you like to do like the actual soundtrack? And he's like, oh, for sure, I'd love to. So we worked with him throughout the project, and I believe it was a mix of him, a guy on the team, Dave, and I believe Alex, kind of came up with this jazz swing sort of thing that kept the tempo, but also matched kind of where the aesthetic, so to speak, because the art style is based in 60s kind of movie posters. And there's a famous artist that I'm blanking again on the name of, but we based a lot of stuff off that kind of art and that kind of setting. So like swing and jazz and whatnot was also popular and around that same era. So it kind of fit. And from there, it was just a bunch of iteration, experimentation to see what stuck and what didn't. And eventually we came out with like the soundtrack that we have now, which I agree is very go.
So if I may switch the questions to like about you, Tom, specifically. Sure. When did you first become interested in video games?
In like playing them, or is in like developing them professionally?
Well, we'll start with playing them.
Okay. When I was very, very young, I remember playing NES at my buddy's house. We would stay up and try to beat the Super Mario Bros. Or like Duck Hunt or other random games. And then same thing with SNES. And it wasn't actually until the PlayStation that I was able to get my first console, because my parents were kind of a little leery about video games and whatnot. But eventually I got a PlayStation, and then from there it was kind of just, each generation I'd get a different console and play a ton. I think when I started to get really into it was around like Halo 2. Those two games were a large part of my childhood. Played a lot of that, and eventually it just became one of my bigger hobbies, probably my biggest hobby. And yeah, so it's been from very early on to like now. I'm still a very avid gamer, obviously.
Okay, when did you start to realize that developing games in a professional capacity was something you like wanted to do as like a career path?
So school-wise, I was taking I took civil engineering, was actually what my degree's in, and it was during kind of my semi last year. I say semi because I was in a co-op program, and it's kind of a blur. You'd kind of do 4 months in, 4 months out, so there's no like set years, so to speak. But I was nearing the end of my degree, and I realized like this may not be something I want to do. And I started looking at other options that were out there and exploring kind of like what you could make a viable career out of. And I was like, you know what, I enjoy video games a ton. Maybe there's something there. So I looked into it, saw that there was a whole bunch of different fields and different things you could do, kind of like overwhelming, to be honest, as someone that didn't really look into it much before. And then I used my last co-op term to get a job at a mobile studio here in Toronto called XMG, and I got a testing job. So I would go, for 4 months, I would go in and test mobile games. And it was just the difference in the atmosphere between some of the engineering jobs that I had before and like working at that studio was like made me fall in love with it, because it was like, oh, I'm talking to people about the shared hobby we all have. I can come in and be super excited about a video game launching, or super disappointed when a video game launches, and I can talk to people about that, versus talking to people that are much older than me about their kids' hockey games. It was a nice change of pace. And so after graduating from the engineering program, I looked into kind of like colleges and what other opportunities there were to kind of surround myself with like-minded people. And I found George Brown's game design program, which was a post-grad program. And I went in for an interview and talked to JP, who is, I think, the program coordinator for it. And, the structure sounded really cool. There was a thesis stage project where you make something from scratch by yourself. And there was also the class itself, because it's a smaller class, acts as a studio, and you actually hire up students from the other disciplines. So there's a game development program, there's a game programming course, and there's a game art course. And so the game design course is a postgrad, the other ones are undergrads, and we would hire up students. And so when that was explained to me, I was like, that sounds really cool and sounds very useful and very hands-on. So I went there, and then kind of the rest is history, so to speak. Met a bunch of guys. We started making Runbow, and then it just kind of whirlwinded from there to, now it's what I do day in and day out.
Yeah, and so now that Runbow has been launched on the Switch, like, what other types of genres are you and the rest of 13AM games interested in, like, delving into, like, in, like, the coming years?
I think, well, our next title, Double Cross, which was revealed a while ago, I believe, is coming out sometime in the near future. It's another platforming game. It's an action platformer RPG type thing, but it's more of a single player experience. It's very much closer to something like a Guacamelee or a Iconoclast or Tesla Grad or something like that. So that's kind of what was next out of the gate, because we wanted to see if we could make a narrative kind of single player focused game. And then I think from there we've done some experimentation with different prototypes with like different genres, but I think we're interested basically in whatever kind of catches our, like, whenever we make a prototype and everyone sits around and goes, that there's something there, I think is more how we do it than looking at a specific genre and being like, we want to make something in that genre. We kind of brainstorm a bit more and decide on cool ideas and then what fits, more than like deciding to work on a specific genre.
Mm-hmm. And now it's time for my favorite question that everyone always understands perfectly and there's never any confusion over. In your capacity as a video game player and a video game developer, is video games?
Is video games what?
That's the question.
Is yes.
Okay,
yes.
then. And with that, this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast is coming to a close. I would like to thank Tom of 13AM Games for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, if any of the negative 12 people listening to this are interested in Runbow, there'll be a link to the Runbow portion of the 13AM Games website, so you know, like, what specific version of it you want.
Mm-hmm.
You can follow 13AM Games on the Twitters to keep up with all their latest stuff. If for some reason you enjoyed listening to this, you can like and subscribe, and on the rare chances I say anything worth reading, you can follow me on the Twitters at TGorman83. And yeah, Runbow, get it. Expect to hate your friends.
Agreed.
And yep, this has been the Pumpkin Copter Cast, a good old podcast about video games. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next time.